pencils to use for realistic drawings. In this and oil-based pencils. It's also in one of my speed drawings on my YouTube channel, so feel free to check that out. I'd appreciate it. And let's start off with wax-based pencils. So I started this portrait with just a simple sketch using a 2H pencil or an HB pencil. Either one would work to get a very light sketch around the contours of the animal. Now, I don't want to focus on too much detail in here, but I definitely want to get in the main structures of the face and the way that the fur curves around the lion. I think a common misconception is that many beginner artists want to just jump in straight into coloring the piece where they don't actually think about the preliminary sketch. And the preliminary sketch is so important because you either can get the proportions really right or really wrong, which can either make or break your piece in the long run. So it's really important to get those proportions right. Well, enough about that. Let's dive right into the wax-based side. So the wax-based side is on the left-hand side, if you can see, and I did this in Prismacolors. The two pencils I used in this in this drawing were Prismacolor Premier. These are wax-based pencils. They are great for blending out, and I also think they're great for beginners too. So one of the other reasons why you really want to know which pencils to choose or which pencils to use are because you might be doing portraits and you might also be doing animals. For me, I don't just do animals and I don't just do portraits. So I find both pencils are essential for different needs. But honestly, if you're just starting out, I recommend getting a small set, maybe of 24 Prismacolor Premier pencils. These are great wax-based pencils for building up multiple layers, and you can eventually achieve a realistic look as long as you build up a lot of layers, have a high range of value, and also make sure your proportions are right underneath your pencils, but that is something else I discuss in another video. But anyways, back to the pencils. Another quality of wax-based pencils are that they're easier to break and the lead shatters. So I find with Prismacolors is that the build is slightly unfinished on the end. It doesn't have a back like these other Polychromos Faber-Castell pencils. They have a back, so the build quality is a little bit more superior definitely on the Polychromos. So if you're very into the build quality, then the Polychromos definitely take the lead on this one. But the Prismacolors are definitely great. Are definitely great overall, but the Polychromos are generally a little harder to control and blend, so that is a little bit of a drawback that you want to consider. Another thing that's really important to consider is something called wax bloom. So Prismacolors, or not Prismacolors, wax-based pencils such as Prismacolor and other brands like Caran d'Ache Luminance, and even the very high quality brands like I just said, they have this thing called wax bloom, and wax bloom can be achieved by applying a lot of pressure to the paper, and this is usually when you do burnishing and stuff. And basically what it does is it leaves a thin film on the top of the paper. Now, you will not get this with oil-based pencils. You will not get a wax bloom, but I feel that oil-based pencils are much harder to work with when you are trying to blend out things because of their harder core. So they generally work better with blending with solvents than with burnishing. Many of my wax-based pencils I blend with a burnishing technique, whereas my oil-based pencils I generally do solvent, but generally it honestly doesn't really matter. You can use wax-based pencils with solvent and oil-based pencils with burnishing, just because of the fact that wax-based pencils are just better naturally for burnishing because of their really creamy, consistent core, versus the oil-based that are not very creamy and consistent, but they come at a benefit of adding more detail. So with animals, you definitely want to have more detail. So on this piece, overall, I think the Faber-Castell definitely offered a lot more detail on the right-hand side, as you can see. Whereas the Prismacolors, I felt like offered a lot more colors and very rich creaminess. It almost looked like an oil painting, whereas the Faber-Castell was still, I could kind of tell that it looked like a colored pencil drawing, and that's good in some ways, and it's not, and it can also be a drawback in other ways. So it's important to analyze the properties and test these out on paper before you actually start drawing. Another thing I noticed that on this piece that I would have wanted to have it concealed more on both sides. As I say, art is not, any of the art I do is not perfect. There's always things I can improve on. And it's really important as an artist to look at your last piece, pick out maybe 3 things at least that you want to work on, and then try to incorporate that into your next piece. As you can see, this line, I'm pretty satisfied with this line for the most part, but there is definitely a lot of ways I think that could be improved. I think if maybe I spent a little bit more time on some of the aspects of like adding more details into the fur, because I think the fur is a part where I kind of rushed a little bit because I just wanted to get a lot of layers down, and also maybe adding a little bit more detail into the eyes and smoothing out some of the areas. And also I noticed that the transition on the what do you call it, the paws was a little bit kind of elongated and kind of too skinny looking, so it's really important that I could have maybe spent a little bit more time on that when I was blending it out. Another thing to note when you're blending using solvent with oil-based pencils or wax-based pencils or any kind of pencils is that you have to build up a lot of layers to get the solvent on your paper. Something I noticed on the right-hand side of this piece was that it appeared much lighter than the burnished side with the with the wax-based Prismacolor Premier. So I think the Prismacolor Premiers or the wax-based pencils did better in terms of having a deeper range of values, whereas the oil-based pencils, it was harder to get much of a value change because I had to keep building up more layers. I think I had to do three at least, maybe 4 separate solvent layers on here, whereas the burnishing I only did at the very end, and then I did maybe 1 more layer over that. So the solvent was definitely time-consuming in terms of getting values, but the burnishing was time-consuming in terms of it kind of hurt my wrist. So it's something really important to keep in mind. Also, I felt like the right-hand side was a little distorted with right bottom side. I don't think I had enough detail using those oil-based pencils, so I think it would have been a good idea to maybe max out my opportunities with using detail on oil-based pencils. Both of these pencils are great overall, and something I used to get the fine details in maybe the wax-based pencils that you couldn't get detail as much as you could in the oil-based pencils, I used an X-Acto knife, and this is great in the fur because you can etch in all the little tiny hairs, whereas in when you're using solvent and oil-based pencils, you can't really do that because you're covering the paper with all the solvent, and you can't really get into the paper. Now, of course, you can do that with oil-based pencils and burnishing technique. So it's really important that you vary up your technique every once in a while and try different new things. I think that was definitely a positive about this piece. I was experimenting a lot. So now let's talk about the pricing of these 2 different types of pencils. In this video, I'll be using Prismacolor to represent the wax-based and Faber-Castell to represent the oil-based. So let's start off with Prismacolor. So I've been using Prismacolor for over 2 years now, and they're the first type of professional grade color pencils that I started using. So they come in a wide range of sets. The lowest range they have is a 12 set. which I have, but I don't have it with me. But these ranges are the common ranges I use in my colored pencil drawings. The first range is a 24 set colored pencils. This is great for most people. You don't really need a ton of pencils to get a realistic drawing. It's really about understanding things like color theory and being able to mix your own colors. This can save you a lot more money. Also, I have in the middle, I have a 132 set of Prismacolor Premier colored pencils. These are great. I use these probably the most out of all my pencils. And this may look like it's a lot of pencils, but actually it's not the biggest. Prismacolor has a 150 set, so I haven't even gotten there yet, but one day I'll get there soon. But this is my highest number of pencils I have for Prismacolor, is 132 set. And then I also have a 72 set right here, which is a little bit older. It has a bunch of different colors. You can see they come in kind of a tin and kind of a plastic tray on the inside. As you can see, they're kind of used, that's why they're in different shapes. So anyways, so generally the pricing on Prismacolors can be anywhere from like maybe $40 to over $100 per piece. You can, I think these were almost about $50. So they are pretty expensive, maybe 40 actually, I would say. This was definitely over 100, I remember when I bought it, so they can be a little bit pricey, but they're not as pricey as many oil-based pencils. So I highly recommend getting or trying out these Prismacolor pencils. They're great for wax-based solutions. And generally, wax-based pencils are used for beginners, intermediate, and advanced, since they're the most easy to work with. And they're also generally, Prismacolors are generally typically more affordable than oil-based pencils such as Faber-Castell. Next, we're moving on to oil-based pencils, and in this demonstration, I'm using Faber-Castell Polychromos. So my first Faber-Castell Polychromos set was a 36 color set of colored pencils, and I got this, I think it was around $60 or maybe a little bit more, so it's definitely a little bit more pricier than the Prismacolors, I would say. But they have really good value overall, and I'm saying both brands, you know, have very great value, and so do oil-based. And this set came with a bunch of different colors, you know, your primary kind of colors. You can see right here. They even sent me a little book right here, so it's very important to know what type of pencils you have. And I think a 36 set is fine for most people. That's what I started off with, and to be honest, I don't really use that much of these colors anyways, so even a 12 or 24 set might be fine. Also, recently, about a year ago, I got a 120 Polychromos colored pencil set, and this is the biggest set that Faber-Castell makes. As you can see, there's multiple trays. Even more, look at all those greens and reds, and then there's a lot of neutral colors. I find that I really only use much of the neutral colors, since most of my pictures are of portraits or animals, so you honestly probably don't really need all these colors, but it can be handy to have, definitely. So I would say Prismacolors generally range anywhere from probably like over $50 to 300, maybe even 400 bucks. So I think so it's really important to know what your pricing is. They're definitely quite a little bit more expensive than Prismacolors. Well, for those of you who want to see what what burnishing means in colored pencils, I have these Prismacolor colorless blenders, which I use for blending out my Prismacolors, and I can also use this for blending out any other wax-based pencils. They're very helpful to handle. And then, as I was talking about solvent, I use this Gamsol mineral spirit solvent. It's great for blending out colors and smooth transitions. I use this both in wax and oil-based pencils, and I also use a paintbrush to blend it out too, and I dip it into here, and this little towel while I blend it out. Wrong answer between these two different types of pencils. It really depends on which one works for you, what your medium is, what your subject is, and what your budget is, and other factors. So it's important to really do the research before you pick a good color pencil brand. If that helps, let me know if you have any questions on these two different types of pencils, wax and oil-based, and if so, please write them in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a great day.